When I was a sophomore in college, I lived in a small but beautiful historic studio apartment in a small East Coast city that had somewhat of a reputation for crime and danger. However, the neighborhood I lived in was usually considered one of the good neighborhoods. It was close to the city's university and was mostly students living there, especially on the street my building was on. My building was a huge four-story townhouse, if you can really call it that. It was really a mansion as a whole, built in 1895. The architecture was really awesome. Built-in bookshelves and huge mahogany pocket doors that slid into walls. Anyways, the building wasn't exactly in mint condition, and my landlord was pretty lazy. He would always come by and check up on things and make promises to get stuff fixed, but never really got around to doing much of anything. The apartment I was renting was on the first floor, and my front door immediately on the left as you walked in the building's door to the street. This door, the building's front door, which from the street opened to a small lobby area with only one door in it, mine, and a staircase to the other apartments upstairs, was huge and heavy and never really locked. In fact, you couldn't lock it, and in fact, it didn't even close all the way. So basically the door to my apartment was open to the street. I asked my landlord countless times to please do something about the front door, but he never did anything. Well, one night I was getting home from work and it was really late, about 3:45 a.m. I worked as a pizza delivery driver at a place that was open really late every night, and I was just sitting on my couch watching a little TV before I went to bed. I'd also gotten totally naked, something I truly loved being able to do considering I lived alone. Anyways, not 10 minutes since I'd gotten home and sat down, I hear 3 slow knocks on my door. I'm thinking, who the fuck would be at my door at this hour? What could they possibly want? And why didn't I hear the building's front door open like I normally do? Young and naive, I was half scared and half intrigued. I put a robe on and slowly crept towards the door, which, by the way, was literally right next to the couch where I was sitting. At this point in time, my door didn't have a peephole, so I just had to kind of take a leap of faith and open the door. When I did, a tall, emaciated, middle-aged man stood staring down at me with low eyes and a grin. He was wearing all black in many layers, and a big black trench coat. The first thing he said was, "Can I come in?" With the door barely open, I got a deep pit in my stomach and just went, no man, what's up?" He just stared into my eyes for a second, clearly disappointed, and then said, "I've seen you around," and then started to grin again. The pit in my stomach had evolved into a churning sensation, and I was starting to get nauseous. "Yeah, I've been watching you, and I like the way you look," he said. "So, you gay? Bisexual?" I was just like, "I don't know, but it's getting late. I'm going to bed. Bye." He kind of nodded and lingered for a second, as did I, watching to make sure I saw him leave the building. Once he did, I closed the door, locked it, and stood with my hand still on the knob for a good minute at least. After I snapped out of my shock, I ran over to my couch and pushed it up against the door. I ended up sleeping on the couch that night. Even though it was right there, it just made me feel safer, like I could hear if something happened. Well, nothing happened that night, and it wasn't until about a week later, on one of my nights off from work, that I was sitting around my apartment winding down by myself after I had some friends over drinking and smoking a little bit, as college kids do. All of a sudden, I heard a weird rattling noise coming from across the room, so I turned off the music I was playing to find out that it was coming from none other than my front doorknob. I looked at it for a second and saw that both the knob and the top lock were jiggling. Someone was trying to get in. Like a deer in the headlights, I was frozen, staring at things wiggle and shake until I started to see the top lock actually budge and start to turn. I leapt up from my chair and soared to the door, grabbing tightly on the lock and forcefully twisting it back to being locked. The jiggling of the lock and knob stopped for a second because whoever it was clearly knew that I knew. It was only a second though before they just started struggling again, and I had to use all my might to keep it still. Sweat was dripping down my forehead and ribcage after about 15 seconds of wrestling with this intruder. It suddenly stopped, and I heard the building door open and close, and footsteps run down the stairs of the stoop of the sidewalk. Just like I was before, I was paralyzed with my hands on the door for a good while before I realized I was crying and shaking and that I needed to call someone. My instinct was to call the police. In hindsight, I regret this for the following reasons. I was having basically a panic attack while I was on the phone with 911 and actually threw up during the call. and I think that's why they decided I was just fucked up or something. When the two police got to my apartment, they stood in my doorway as I struggled to recount to them what had happened as I was shaking and crying. I noticed at one point they're both smirking and laughing and say, "What's funny right now?" One of them goes, "It reeks of marijuana." I was just like, okay, and basically argued with them after that. Long story short, they ended up confiscating a bunch of shit from my apartment and basically turning the whole situation into a little mini drug bust. Although they said they weren't going to charge me with anything, just take my shit. Nothing about this attempted break-in besides keep your door locked. I was devastated and felt so helpless. I hate to make this story so long, so I'll try to keep the last part short. Basically the same scenario happened one more time about 2 weeks from the last time. Only instead of calling the police, I called my dad, who raced down in an hour, 2-hour drive from his house to this place, with a crowbar up his sleeve. Unfortunately, by the time he got here, whoever it was had already left. They didn't struggle very hard this time. My dad ended up cussing out the landlord and demanding he get the door fixed and install a new lock and peephole on my door. He did make this happen within a reasonable amount of time, and I also got one of those bars you wedge between the doorknob and the floor, as well as an aluminum baseball bat to protect myself with. So I felt a lot better from then on. Needless to say, though, I ended my lease for that apartment a month early and never moved back to that street. I never found out for sure who was trying to pick my locks and if it was the guy who had come to my door the first time. But whoever it was, let's not meet.
So here's a little backstory. I'm a 19-year-old female living in the UK. I was on my day off from work, as I worked 6 days a week at a very unpopular delivery service called Yodel. My mom was out the night before, staying at my grandmother's house due to her being ill. I have 2 small dogs, both Chihuahua Cross Yorkshire Terriers, who don't really need all that much walking, but this Sunday morning I was feeling it. It was around 7:30 in the morning, which means it was still pretty dark out when I put their coats on and left the house. The local park is a 2-minute walk away from my house, which I had no problem getting to. So, cut to about 10 minutes into my walk. I'm halfway around the park when I notice that it's brighter than usual. I turn around to see a parked car in the parking lot, with its lights on full beam, directed straight at me. Now, at this point, I'm starting to feel uneasy as I'm about to start making my way back there, as that is the way that I had entered the park. Something in my gut told me that it was an incredibly bad idea, so instead, I decided to cut across to the adjoining field and make my way across from there, as there was a public pathway running parallel to both fields. So again, cut to about 15 minutes later, and I'm starting to calm down, feeling like I had overreacted to the whole situation. I get to the end of the public pathway. I passed a few harmless people, and I'm feeling pretty stupid at that point. What I had forgotten was that the parking lot previously mentioned was just up the road, and the road I had come out at connected to it. As I was just about to turn off the public pathway back onto the main road, a car drives past that, at first, didn't look particularly memorable until the passenger seat in the car drove past with the biggest, cruelest, most evil grin on his face as they passed me. I stopped in my tracks, and they pulled up just down the road and waited. I started walking home double time, and the walk that would have taken me 20 minutes took me 10, and the entire walk home, this car followed me. Thankfully, I had to cut through little alleyways to get to the road leading to the park, and I managed to lose them by the time I got to my house. After I had caught my breath, I looked out my kitchen window carefully, without moving the blinds, to see 3 guys maybe in their mid-20s, stalking around the area, presumably looking for me and my dogs. So to you 3 creeps who have prompted me to change my dog walking routine like a freaking cop, let's not meet.
Okay, bit of background. There was a time when I was 17 where I sort of lived in 2 houses. We were moving and my dad lived in the new house where he had a job, and my mom, my siblings, and I lived in the old house where our friends in school were. The new house wasn't anywhere near the old one. It was about 6 or 7 hours drive. So, on a good long weekend, we could make the drive, and my dad would come up in our smart car whenever he could. One weekend, I was off on break and was going to spend a few days basically camping in the new house with my dad. I felt totally safe with him, and I was looking forward to the trip and even the time alone while he worked. The trip started out normally. We stopped at a rest stop about a quarter of the way there to pee, and we planned to stop at a halfway point for a gas station, tea, and another bathroom break. We were familiar with the gas station and had stopped there many times. It was a Royal Farms, if you have those near you. It's a chain place and relatively safe compared to some of the greasier places. We went in and I hit the bathroom while Dad made us both tea. I noticed a man looking awfully stoned standing near the men's room in the fire exit. He was wearing an entirely too tight leopard print shirt with a white jacket, and he had slimy white blonde hair. He looked maybe 45. I smiled politely and went to my dad where I felt safe. I'm socially anxious, but not cripplingly. My dad isn't huge, but he's kind of a prepper and knows self-defense better than I did at the time. I knew that if there was someone who wanted to hurt me, he'd be there. Checking out with our tea, the stone guy was right in front of us, and he turned around to talk with us. The first thing I noticed was that he seemed more aware now. Less stoned for sure, but still off somehow. But in a different way. He was laughing and talking with the cashier about the Cosmo magazine on the rack. He wasn't buying one, but he said, and I quote, "Nice, they sell these everywhere these days." He seemed to be trying to initiate us into conversation. The cashier was just trying to ignore how much he was looking at her boobs and cash him out. "So, how many months?" he asked us. At first, I was wondering if he thought I was pregnant. Now, I'm a big girl, but my weight's on my hips and thighs, and I'm not shaped like a pregnant woman at all. "Pardon?" my dad asked the man, putting an arm around me. "How long have you two, He grinned, raising his eyebrows. My dad immediately dropped his arm, which was unfortunate because I felt safer with it there. The man, seeing some kind of opportunity, put his hand gently on my right hip. "Oh, no, this is my daughter," he said, a bit baffled and too unprepared for the situation. The man's hand slid a bit lower. Is she single?" he said to my dad, as though I were property he was buying. "No," my dad snapped. "She's not. Goodbye." The man left, and thank goodness, and the cashier rolled her eyes and told us he was a regular, and to be careful going out because he smoked by the entrance. My dad and I waited until we saw him enter his car before we left. I never feel safe in the smart car. It's tiny, and it always attracts a lot of attention because it's a bit of a novelty. There was some traffic as we continued, and it was getting dark, but I swear that man's red truck was always somehow behind us. I pointed it out to my dad, who said that he probably wouldn't follow us all the way to the house, seeing as we split off the highway soon, and the drive was still about 3.5 hours long. The truck followed us for 2 hours, but finally we stopped seeing him. We were on a more secluded road, a 2-lane one with hills and curves, but still well-traveled. We stopped again at a rest point, and I was in the car watching the road when I saw the red truck drive past on the road. He had still been following us, only an hour from our house. Thank God he didn't notice we'd pulled off. He might have known where our new house was. Too close for comfort, leopard shirt man. Let's not meet.
I live in a small town in Canada. I'm a 16-year-old half Asian and half Native American girl, but I pass as full Asian. It's relevant to the story. A lot of people here hate Asians and or have yellow fever. I'm about 5'4" and about 90 or 100 pounds, and I know well I'm weak and not threatening. A few months ago, I was downtown for about an hour after school, and I was heading home. The street I was on was busy. Lots of cars driving or parked on the sides of the street, and a lot of people on the sidewalks. One of the cars slowed down a little, and a woman yelled, "Hey," or something. And I looked over, but I couldn't really see them, so I ignored it and kept walking, thinking they were talking to someone else. Not long after I passed the driveway, I heard a sort of yell that sounded the same. I kept walking, but they pulled out of the driveway and followed me slowly. I tried to ignore it, but I came to an intersection where I had to wait, and they pulled up next to me. In the passenger seat was a woman who I think was in maybe her mid-30s. To be honest, she kind of looked like stereotypical white trash, but that may be too harsh. I could see a man maybe mid or late 40s in the driver's side. Again, the woman said, "Hey." I said hi because I didn't want to be rude, and she asked my name. I almost told her before realizing I probably shouldn't, so I said why, and she responded, "Because you're cute." I awkwardly thanked her, and I think she said you're welcome, but I was starting to cross the street already. I was a little freaked out because in the interaction, she seemed kind of laughing like she was making fun of me or knew something I didn't. I saw the car again a couple of times, and they seemed to be circling blocks trying to keep up with me or know where I was. I was scared because soon I would reach my house, and they would see me going in and know where I live. I heard them come up behind me and the woman said something again. I tried to ignore her, but she kept going and said things like, "Turn around. Why won't you talk to me?" I didn't want to be rude, but I was very uncomfortable. When I wouldn't talk to her and started walking faster, she started yelling things more violent and saying they wanted to take me somewhere or tell me or show me something. She called me a squinty-eyed chink, said I should go back to my own country if I don't even speak English. I was starting to tear up because I was confused and I was alone, and they were both much bigger than me. I walked straight past my house and went on for 6 or 7 blocks to my stepmom's friend's house. They seemed to follow me until 2 streets before the house, sometimes still saying things, but I couldn't hear or I don't remember. I don't know why they gave up there. My stepmom's friend luckily was home and let me in and called the police, but they never found the people, probably because I never saw the license plates. I've been followed before, but nothing like this happens to me often, so to the laughing woman, I really hope we don't meet again.